Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Last week we spoke about Boetie Boer or Stuart Wilkin, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it somewhere up here for you. But today we're going to talk about the Station Strangler. And if you haven't heard about the story, I do just want to put a disclaimer that this story also has a lot of child abuse, child sexual assault. So if you do not want to hear the story, then please don't watch it. But if you're here to look at how I got this look, or you're here to hear about the Station Strangler or Norman Simons, then let's get into it.
Intended for mature audiences only.
On the 12th of March 1994, two boys, one named Alroy van Roy and his cousin Reno, left their house in Strand, which is in the Western Cape. And they left their house in order to go to a local shopping center because they wanted to, push some trolleys so that they could get a little bit of extra change in order for them to go to an arcade place so that they could play some games and buy some sweets. So Alroy and Reno worked for a little while, but then they kind of started getting hungry. So Reno decided to go into the arcade to buy some slop chips or hot chips. But while they were waiting for their food, they kind of got distracted and they went to have a look around the arcade games. And they were approached by a man who offered to pay for their games. And they were like, yes, please. We just worked our long day. We didn't really get much change. So they were happy that this man offered the money. And then they also invited him to come and play some games with them. But then while they were enjoying all their games, they kind of forgot about their food. And then they remembered eventually when they started getting really hungry. So then they left the arcade and they went to eat their food or their slop chips on the pavement outside. And when the boys were sitting on the pavement outside, the same man who paid for their arcade games approached them again. And he said that he was going to offer them 10 rand. The boys could help him carry some boxes to the train station. And in 1994, 10 rand was a lot of money for these young boys. And halfway through to the train station, Reno started getting a little bit suspicious because he kind of figured out that these boxes were empty. And he was concerned as to why they were carrying empty boxes to a train station. And Reno told Alroy that he wants to leave because there's been a lot of gossip around about a man who was killing young boys. But Alroy was kind of like, it's not happening in Strand, we'll be fine, don't worry about it. But Reno still wasn't comfortable with this, so he ended up leaving Alroy with the man and boxes, and he was like, forget about the money, I don't feel comfortable with this, and he kind of left Alroy there. And sadly, Alroy didn't return home for dinner that night. And Alroy's body was found round about a week later in Kleinvlei near Eersterivier. And this is 22 kilometers away from Strand. So the discovery of Alroy van Roy's body would be key in ending a series of murders which had plagued the nearby community of Mitchell's Plain for 8 years. Alroy van Roy was victim number 23 of the serial killer who had later become known as the Station Strangler. South Africa in 1994 was a hub of rebirth and struggle because apartheid had just officially fallen and the country was to celebrate by holding its first democratic elections, in which all South Africans could participate regardless of their race, gender, anything. But sadly for 23 families, this new freedom that South Africa was really excited about meant very little to them at the time because a lot of their young sons had been murdered very brutally and the killer was still haunting the streets of Mitchell's Plain at the time. And Mitchell's Plain is around 32 kilometers away from Cape Town, and back in 1994 children still believed it to be safe to walk around any areas and they could just do kind of what they wanted to do. Children would generally walk around Mitchell's Plain, they would go to the beach, they would ride the train system by themselves, and they would also go to like shopping centers by themselves as well as to other friends' houses, except when local children started to disappear. So let's just go back to the beginning because this is going to be a long story, so I need your concentration caps on. So the first recorded victim of the Station Strangler was in 1986. It was a young boy named Jonathan Claassen, who was 14 years old at the time. His body was found on the 3rd of October 1986, and he was found in the field surrounding the Moordam station. He had been sodomized, his hands were tied behind his back, and his face was pushed into the sand. and he was also strangled with pieces of his own clothing. And later on with the other victims, this seemed to be the modus operandi of the Station Strangler. So even before 1990 could even appear, another 8 victims would be found. Yusuf Hoffman was 10 years old at the time, and he was murdered in 1987 on the 7th of January, and he was found in Rocklands. The body of Mario Thomas, who was 13 years old at the time, his body was found 16 days later in Kales River. However, the 4th of the Station Strangler's victims remains unidentified to this day, which is very heartbreaking because it obviously means that he could never be buried peacefully or laid to rest peacefully, and while his parents would not know what happened to him. The unknown child was found in 1987 in April, and he was found in the same location as Station Strangler's first victim, who was Jonathan Clark, and that was at the Moordam station. Another victim was named Freddie Cleves, and he was 12 years old at the time, and he was found 2 months later at Balha station. Samuel Ngaba was found also in 1987 at the same station as Frederick Cleves. The 7th victim of the Station Strangler was also never identified, and he also didn't have the opportunity to be buried with him. He was found on the 1st of October 1987, also at the Moordam railway station, and that was around a year, almost exactly 1 year, that Jonathan Claessen's body was found at the same station. Calvin Spiro was just 9 years old when his life was taken from the Station Strangler. His body was found near Unibel, and this was a station near Balha, and that was on the 8th of February 1988. Denver Gazu, who was the last of the victims of the 1980s, he was 11 years old when his body was found, and his body was found near Sarepta station. The discovery of so many bodies, and especially so many children's bodies, sent the community of Mitchell's Plain into a hectic panic, and all the cases were assigned to one officer, and he had no experience or prior experience of any murders or any serial killings. And when he was doing the investigations, he couldn't link the serial killings together, so they weren't put together as one murderer at the time, and he eventually ended up retiring from the police station shortly after the case had been assigned to him. And when this case was assigned to him, there was hardly any work done on the case at all. And obviously, once the 1990s rolled in, South Africa was getting excited because there was freedom knocking on so many South Africans' doors. But unfortunately, there was one South African who was using his freedom in a different way. The Station Strangler had so far committed 9 murderers, and there was no sign of police investigations. There was no sign of even a suspect at all. And for 2 years, the Station Strangler seemed to kind of control his urges. In October 1992, he struck again. After 2 years of silence, the Station Strangler returned to Mitchell's Plain, unfortunately to claim his next victim. The body of 11-year-old Jacobus Lowe was discovered on the 27th of October 1992, and this was in Munundi Beach. The Station Strangler then went quiet for around about another year and a bit, and then in 1994, January, all hell broke loose. A body of an unidentified child was found on the 13th of January 1994, and this was in Volta Freire Dunes. The dunes here were very remote and very desolate, and it was also very sandy, and it had a lot of shrubs, so it was perfect for hiding something because nothing could really be seen if you were just kind of looking at the dunes. At this time now, the Station Strangler found this to be his new killing grounds, and the rest of the bodies would be found at these dunes. Elino Sprinkle's body was found at the dunes, and he was only 11 years old at the time, and that was on the 20th of January 1994. Donovan Swartz was found 5 days later at the same dunes, and he was the adopted son of a lady named Stella Jafter, who would later report that she searched for her son, who was 10 years old at the time, for 2 days before she reported it to police. But the police told her when she went there that she should just keep looking because there's plenty of other missing children and they don't know where they are. But horrifically, the only way Stella would find out what actually happened to her son was when she was watching the news. And apparently a helicopter was panning over the dunes, and they said that a dead body had been found of a child. The reason that she knew that it was her son Donovan was because when they were panning over, they saw his clothes, and she said he was wearing khaki like shorts, like pants. He had like a white and red striped sweater on, and she knew instantly from the time that she saw his clothes that that was Donovan. Luckily though, they had removed the body and only his clothes were on the dune. There's just so much information. I've been talking so much that I haven't even started my makeup yet. But on the same day that Donovan's body was found, 12-year-old Jeremy Benjamin was found just 20 meters away from his body. Jeremy had been actually missing for a week before his family noticed, and that was just because Jeremy had said that he would be at a friend, and he said that he was moving between friends, and by the time the family actually caught up whether or not he was here or there, they didn't actually realize that he was missing. Jeremy would move a lot between his mother's house in Mitchell's Plain and his father's house in Stellenbosch. He also had friends that were in Macassar and his grandmother who was in Eersterivier. So there was a lot of moving between, and he would just go to them without really communicating. He would just say one weekend, I'm going to dad's house or whatever. So I think that it would have taken maybe a little while for all of them to catch up to where Jeremy actually was, because there was no cell phones back then. And the discovery of so many bodies in such a short period of time made the community even more angry because nothing was being done. And the community of Mitchell's Plain demanded that the police actually take some action into protecting their children. And because there were so many bodies, the community started conducting their own searches of the dunes. And the police did try to start to actually work with the community of Mitchell's Plain, and they went on searches with them. So the week following the discovery of Donovan and Jeremy's body, the South African Army, the police, and the community members went searching the dunes. Sadly, another 8 more bodies were found in these dunes. One of the 8 that were found after Jeremy and Donovan, his name was Jeremy Smith, and he was 13 years old at the time of his murder. Marcelino Cupido was just over 9 years old at the time of his murder. He had been staying with his siblings at the time, and they were all at their grandmother's house. Marcelino just wanted to have some more time with his grandmother, and his mother reluctantly said, okay, you can stay. And unfortunately, that was the last time that she got to see him. Marcelino's mother was only able to identify her child's clothing. She couldn't handle seeing the body and the state that he was in, so his father had to end up identifying him at the morgue. Neville Samai was also identified during this weekend investigation of the dunes, and he was found with an unidentified child. Sorry, I did forget to say that Neville was 14 years old at the time, but he was identified with an unidentified child and an unidentified adult. And this adult that was killed in the dunes would be the only known adult to be murdered by the Station Strangler. Fabian Willemore and Owen Hofmeester were best friends. They were found lying side by side in the dunes. Fabian was only 8 years old, and he had been strangled with Owen's vest. And Owen, who was only 11 years old at the time, had been strangled with Fabian's underpants. At the time of Owen's disappearance, there had been so many children living in the same house. They all stayed at their grandmother's house. Sadly, when looking through the reports, they only noticed that one of the children were missing, because when they had supper, Owen's was the only plate that was still on the table. And I find it's so sad. This story is just very sad to me. The last body to be found when the army and the cops and the community were all searching the dunes was that of another unidentified child. And he was found fully clothed. However, his underpants were lying separately further down the dunes. And this unidentified child had been strangled with a cord. Going through the research, it seemed that all of the Station Strangler's victims had been undressed at one point, and then I assumed murdered and then redressed in some way. Sadly, all of his victims were sodomized. And some forensic psychologists who were looking into this case said that because the Station Strangler redressed them after he had murdered them, they thought that this may be some kind of way that he was trying to undo the bad stuff that he had done. Following all the horrific discoveries of all these children's bodies, as well as the unidentified man and children, a 14-man search squad had been created, and this was in February 1994. And this squad was called the Station Strangler Squad. And the task team was headed up by Lieutenant Johan Kotze. And I do find this quite interesting because this task team, this Station Strangler task team, was very different to the first little investigation that we heard about with one detective, where there was hardly any resources given. They didn't really care at the time. But now for this task team, every resource was given. Everything that these cops needed, they were given. And it kind of makes you think maybe they should have put all these resources in the beginning, and then you wouldn't have so many bodies piling up. Hopefully that's the hope. So this task team was given computers, they were given data capturers, and they were also given a lot of forensic psychologists. And one forensic psychologist they were given was was Mickey Pistorius. And remember, Mickey Pistorius was also the forensic psychologist for Stuart Wilkin, which was our last case. So Mickey was flown in from Pretoria in order to do sessions with the Station Strangler squad, and she faced a lot of challenges because she was the only female in a largely male-dominated force. But during the time that the Station Strangler squad were investigating everything, they were hit up with thousands and thousands of tips. Most of the tips that were given were actually concerned citizens, and they wanted to try and help with this investigation. But a lot of them, unfortunately, were also people just trying to get their 5 minutes of fame. And the squad had to investigate every single claim that was called in or given to them as a tip. So Mickey Pistorius ended up creating a profile of the serial killer. She determined that the racial group of the Station Strangler would be the same as the victims because she believed that they lived in the same community. She also said that she believes that he was aged roughly between 25 and 30 years old. And she believed that the person who was murdering all these children would be in a place of authority, who would be like a teacher or a policeman or a preacher or social worker, something like that. She believed that he would be single, homosexual, and would possibly still be living with his family. Mickey Pistorius also believed that the Station Strangler would have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted as a child. Generally, police like to keep these kind of details private so that they can kind of do their own investigations of these people. But this was a first for South Africa where Mickey Pistorius's profile of the serial killer was released to the public because they felt like they had little choice. They needed to arrest this person before he struck again. And sadly, this was not the case. As we said right in the beginning, Alroy van Rooij's body would be found in 1994. However, Alroy's murder would be a little bit different to all the other children because a witness actually came forward saying that they saw someone with Alroy on the day that he was murdered. The witness described the Station Strangler as tall, dark of complexion with a scar on his face and an afro-style hair. And this description is very important if you listen to the details later. So remember what she described him as. So the police then made an identikit and they now made a profile based on what this witness said of what they assumed the Station Strangler looked like, as well as remember Mickey Pistorius's profile. Then on the 12th of April 1994, a nurse working at a psychiatric hospital was looking through the newspaper and she noticed this identikit of the possible Station Strangler. And she then called the police because she believed that the person who came into the psychiatric hospital for a little bit of treatment was the Station Strangler. And this person that she had mentioned, his name was Norman Simons. And he was born on the 12th of January 1967 in Greenpoint, Cape Town. During the apartheid era, interracial relationships were illegal. And Norman was the product of an interracial relationship. He had a very, very tumultuous childhood, and as a toddler he was sent to live with his parents in the Eastern Cape where he would be raised with Xhosa traditions. He would then be passed between relatives in the Eastern Cape and Durban, and eventually when Norman was a teenager he went to live with his mother in Cape Town, and his mother now had a new husband and an older brother. And according to Mickey Pistorius's serial killer profile, Norman Simons fit the profile like a glove. One of the first matches was that he was unmarried, still lived with his family. His friends stated that he was a homosexual. That's interesting because his friends said he was. What about Norman saying that he was? No. So just keep that in the back of your head. Norman was very intelligent. He spoke 7 languages. He listened to classical music and apparently dressed impeccably. And he also volunteered at an organization which would help ex-convicts kind of rehabilitate into normal society again. And he claimed to be sexually abused by his brother when he was younger. So after the call from a psychiatric nurse, Norman was brought in for questioning. And instead of answering the questions that the police had for him, he decided to write his whole life story. So on the morning of April 13th, 1994, Norman Simons was arrested in connection with the murders of all the children, except Alroy van Rooij's murder, because police said they were still building a case and they didn't have enough evidence for that. And interestingly enough, the police let Norman go because they felt that they didn't have even enough evidence to hold him for all the Mitchell's Plain murders and the surrounding areas. But they released him and then rearrested him later for Alroy van Rooij's murder, after they said that they didn't have enough evidence. But after a few days in custody, Norman admitted and confessed to all of the murders and said that he had been killing children since 1986. He then retracted his statement and then confessed again. And then when he confessed again, he even said that he would show the police where he left the bodies. Then early next morning, the police took Norman to where he said that he may have left the bodies, but they did this in the very, very early morning because they didn't want the community know that they had a suspect, just in case. So Norman pointed out the area in the dunes where he said that he left the body, but police searched that and said they couldn't find anything. They did find pieces of clothing of a child's clothing, but they didn't find anybody. Police did say that there were wild dogs that lived in that area, and they thought that the wild dogs may have taken the body parts of this unknown child. In Norman's confession, he stated that he committed the first murder in 1986, which was his final year of school. He said that the murders had been a result of two factors. One, being a young child in the Eastern Cape. Apparently an old lady had put a curse on him. And the second was the most prominent contributing factor, and that was that he had been hearing voices of his older brother, who apparently had sodomized him when he was a child and had driven him to kill. And later on it was found that Norman's brother was found to be murdered, and apparently psychologists said that after his brother had been murdered, this kind of sent him off, and he wasn't really the same person after that. And Mickey Pistorius described Norman, or that type of serial killer, a reversal of the passive and active roles. So basically, when Norman was a child and he was being abused by his brother, Norman played more of the passive role, and obviously his brother giving him this abuse was the aggressor in the role. So when Norman was an adult, he continually tried to recreate this type of aggressive and passive role, and that's why he would choose children that were in similar ages as well as ethnicity to him, that reminded him of the age that he was when he was a child, when he was being and having all this trauma done to him. And she assumed that he was trying to kind of resolve the issues himself by doing all of these murders. Mike Stowe, who was the prosecutor at Norman's trial for Alroy's murder, said that he had a very aggressive reaction whenever Norman's brother was brought up in conversation. Mike Stowe said that Norman would completely change. He would kind of change into a different person, and he would start speaking tongues and would become very aggressive. Norman did end up writing in one of his confessions this sentence, which I will quote: "I am nothing, I am dirty, I am filthy and not worthy. I am sorry for letting you down. Don't get caught up in the same thing. I really regret everything. It's hard to be possessed by unknown factors. These factors cannot be explained by medication. I salute you with love and for better understanding and a peaceful South Africa." End quote. Unfortunately, due to the advanced state of a lot of the bodies that have gone through decomposition, the DNA was either broken down or they were just not able to be processed by the technology in 1994. So police had nothing to tie Norman to any of the killings that had happened in Mitchell's Plain and surrounding areas previously. But the last murder of Alroy van Roy, they believed that they could hold Norman Simons for this murder because of the eyewitness testimony. So Norman was placed in like that identity kind of thing where they all stand in a line and the witness gets to choose who she or he believes was the perpetrator. And Norman was identified by the eyewitness, but not very convincingly. She said that Norman looked to be the man who was with Alroy, but he looks different. Norman's hair was short, and remember, she claimed to see a man with an afro-like hairstyle, but police thought that this was enough evidence to accuse Norman of Alroy's murder. And now the community was relieved that they had finally caught someone who they believed was also guilty of all the children and their murders. But when they knew who it was, they were actually quite shocked at who was arrested. They said that Norman was a member of the community and he had been loved by the community for many years. So the trial for Norman Simons began on the 27th of February 1995, and the judge at the time was W.A. van der Venter. When the eyewitness was unsure of whether Norman was actually the man who did it, they brought in a defense attorney for Norman Simons, and his name was Kooslo. Norman did not testify. He sat in the dock taking notes and doing crossword puzzles at the time. He did sometimes disagree with what the people were saying on the stand, and he would make that clear. It is pouring with rain, if that's what you can hear in the background. And while Norman was having his trial, almost every single piece of evidence that the prosecutors brought into the docket had been questioned. There was So much evidence that didn't make sense, and police were even accused of trying to find the first person they could just so that they could resolve these murders and so that they could appease the public. But on the 15th of June 1995, Norman Simons was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Alroy van Roy. He also had an additional 10 years for kidnapping. And just remember that in South Africa, life does not mean life in prison. Life in South Africa is only 25 years. And Norman was sent to Drakenstein Correctional Facility to serve out his sentence. Even though Norman did have a second confession, he still proclaimed his innocence. He said that he did not kill Alroy. And he even wrote a letter to Alroy's mother to say that he didn't kill her. And Koos Louw was adamant that Norman was innocent, and he even brought his case to the Court of Appeals in 1998. And after the Court of Appeals had read everything, they then left Norman with an increased sentence. They now increased him to life, so he will spend the rest of his life in prison. And in 2005, an inquest was put into Norman's earlier conviction, and it would start kind of a snowball effect on revelations that would bring everything that South Africa thought that they knew about the case to a standstill. So Norman, remember, was not charged with the original killings that happened in Mitchell's Plain and the surrounding area because there was insufficient evidence. And as more evidence started to come out, not only did they lack evidence in Norman Simons' case, also, the evidence didn't match Norman, like I said earlier. Remember, the DNA technology in 1994 was very bad in South Africa. But when the inquest was held in 2005, it was now possible to extract DNA from whatever clothing was left over from the murders that had taken place. Semen that was found on the back of Jeremy Smith's underpants did not match Norman's. Semen that was found on Alroy van Roy's pants did not match Norman. Even one of the notes that was found in one of the victim's pants pockets went for handwriting testing, and that didn't match Norman's handwriting either. One of the victims, they found a crossword puzzle that was lying near the victim's body, and they even tested the way Norman wrote words and numbers, and that also didn't match. But remember that Norman really liked crossword puzzles and did them throughout the trial. Koos Louw showed all of this evidence to the prosecutors and pointed out the innocence of his client. And he claimed that the confessions that Norman gave was under weeks that he was held in interrogation. He said that Norman had become so distraught during the times that he was interrogated that he did go for psychiatric testing. And he said that the police even went to push him for a confession while he was being psychiatrically evaluated. Koos Louw also presented Norman with an alibi for the date of Alroy van Roy's murder. He had apparently been in Claremont at 2 o'clock on the day that Alroy van Roy was murdered, which meant that it was impossible for him to get to Strand in the time that Alroy was murdered, and that was around 4 o'clock. Unfortunately, Norman's whole trial and whole conviction leveraged on the eyewitness's account of who she had seen the night with Alroy van Roy. And Koos also presented a bombshell that 250,000 Rand in 1994 was to be given to the person who could identify the Station Strangler, and that this could lead to a conviction. But it didn't happen that way. 250,000 Rand was given to the person if they could identify Station Strangler. So people were just saying people, I'm assuming, to get the 250,000 Rand. It's a possibility. And Koos also kept harping on that the eyewitness's account was different to what Norman looked like. Norman, remember, had short hair, and she identified positively a man with Afro-style hair. And Koos also pointed out that Norman's initial confession said that he killed Alroy on the train station, but he pointed out that this would have been impossible because there would have been hundreds of people there at the time, because 4 o'clock was around peak time. 2 men did come into the police station to confess that they had been victims of the Station Strangler as well, but they managed to escape. 2 young boys in the 1980s had been abducted and sodomized by a stranger, and this was also in Mitchell's Plain at the time. And the attack had been exactly the same MO as all the other child murders and sexual assaults. And the boys said that they knew Norman at the time, and Norman was not the person who tried to attack them and did attack them. The inquest into Norman's trial continued for another 3 years, and then in December 2008 the inquest was closed, and the judge at the time said that they found that there was enough evidence to prove that Norman had killed at least 6 of the victims in addition to Alroy. But because of the time that Norman had already spent in prison, they didn't put any more sentencing onto him. even though just before they already gave him a life sentence. Unfortunately, the defense attorney who was fighting for Norman for so many years, Koos Low, passed away in 2011. But with all that information, I find this case very interesting. I do find it interesting after so many trials that Norman was still convicted and still sent to prison for this, which is very sad. I'm very conflicted as to whether or not I think that he is guilty. I actually don't think he is guilty. I don't think that he is 100% innocent because he does know things that the Strangler would know. But I also don't think that he committed all those murders. But let me know your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed this story because I definitely did. I find it very sad, but I also find it very interesting. So let me know down below if you think that Norman Simons was guilty. I would love to know. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the story. Please stay safe out there. I hope to see you again next time. Bye.